Raghav, Ananya, Meera, and Aarav. 4 names, 1 family, and a secret so shocking it threatened to destroy everything they thought they knew. What began as a simple move to Dallas spiraled into a nightmare of betrayal, manipulation and hidden agendas, exposing a chilling truth. Sometimes the greatest danger doesn't come from strangers, but from those closest to you. Please subscribe for daily new update of crime story, and watch till end. Ananya Suresh arrived in Dallas with the excitement of someone ready to start a new chapter in life. The city felt enormous compared to the small towns she had grown up in back in India. Wide highways, unfamiliar accents, and the constant rush of people made her feel both thrilled and overwhelmed. She reminded herself that this was the fresh start she had dreamed of, a life where she and her husband, Raghav Nair, could build something stable together. Their apartment on the northern side of the city was modest but welcoming, with sunlight streaming in through large windows every morning. Ananya spent her early days arranging the home, trying to combine her Indian traditions with the American lifestyle she was still learning. Raghav worked long hours in a tech company, leaving early and returning late. Ananya understood his dedication but also felt the loneliness that came with being in a foreign place without friends or family. She used her time to explore the neighborhood, visit nearby parks and take long walks along the tree-lined sidewalks. Slowly, she began adjusting to the rhythm of her new life. Things changed, however, when she learned that her mother-in-law, Meera Nair, would soon be joining them. Raghav believed this would bring more warmth to their household, especially since Ananya often mentioned feeling isolated in the new country. Although she agreed politely, a quiet nervousness grew inside her. Meera arrived a month later, stepping off the airport shuttle with a carefully composed expression. She was dressed neatly, holding her luggage close and observing everything with sharp eyes. At first, things seemed normal. Meera commented on the cleanliness of the apartment, complimented Ananya's cooking, and spoke proudly about how her son had built a life so far away from home. But beneath the surface, Ananya sensed a stiffness in her tone, as though every word carried an unspoken judgment. She tried to ignore the discomfort, hoping it was simply her imagination adjusting to the new dynamics. As days passed, Meera began involving herself more actively in the daily routines of the household. She reorganized the pantry, rearranged the fridge, and suggested different ways for Ananya to manage the chores. Her advice often came masked as concern, though her expressions hinted that she felt the younger woman lacked the experience to run a home properly. Ananya hesitated to argue, not wanting conflict. She reminded herself that many Indian families lived with their elders in harmony, and perhaps she only needed more patience. Despite her efforts, an uncomfortable tension gradually formed. Ananya noticed how Meera observed her closely whenever Raghav was around, as if silently assessing her ability to be a suitable wife. Small criticisms slipped into their conversations. Meera disliked how Ananya spent time reading instead of focusing fully on domestic work. She questioned her decisions in subtle but pointed ways. Raghav, busy with work and unaware of the underlying strain, believed his mother and wife were adjusting well to each other. What troubled Ananya most was not what Meera said, but what she didn't. Silence lingered in the rooms more often now. Some evenings, Meera sat in the living room watching television while Ananya cooked, and the quiet seemed heavy, filled with something unspoken. Ananya sensed that her presence was being evaluated, measured, and judged in ways she could not fully identify yet. Though nothing alarming had happened, a faint unease settled into the walls of their Dallas apartment, hinting at a future far more complicated than anyone expected. The first few weeks after Meera moved in passed in an uneasy rhythm, with Ananya constantly trying to balance her own life and the subtle pressures of her mother-in-law's presence. At first, the disruptions seemed minor, an ingredient missing here, a dish slightly altered there, but over time, a pattern began to emerge that unsettled Ananya in ways she could not ignore. Important papers she had carefully stored in her home office started disappearing. Sometimes she would find folders shuffled or documents she had filed meticulously moved to strange corners of the apartment. At first, she blamed herself, thinking perhaps she had misplaced things in her adjustment to a new household. Yet the incidents kept repeating, and the unease grew. It wasn't only the papers. Small but strange incidents began to invade her daily life. Kitchen ingredients would spoil despite being recently purchased, appliances seemed to malfunction at precisely inconvenient times, and emails she was sure she hadn't sent appeared in her outbox. When Ananya questioned herself, wondering if she had accidentally made errors, the nagging anxiety tightened its grip. She tried to rationalize the events, telling herself that moving to a new country meant adapting to an unfamiliar environment, and stress sometimes made people misplace things or forget minor tasks. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that these problems were not accidental. Meera, meanwhile, remained composed and observant, always appearing helpful while quietly reinforcing her subtle control over the household. She often suggested that Ananya take more rest or reduce her work hours, emphasizing the stress of living in a foreign country. Her advice seemed practical at first, but the consistency with which incidents occurred, documents disappearing, emails being altered, and ingredients spoiling began to make Ananya question the convenience of these suggestions. Slowly, a gnawing doubt took root in her mind. Was it really just an unfortunate series of accidents, or was someone deliberately orchestrating the chaos around her? Ananya began paying closer attention to her environment, trying to catch patterns. She noticed how Meera seemed to know about things she had not shared with anyone. Small details about the office, personal routines or private messages on her phone. The realization brought a chill, though she struggled to find proof. Her husband Raghav remained oblivious, assuming that the occasional mishaps were part of the stress of adjusting to life in a new country and living with an elder family member. He often reassured Ananya, saying that these were minor inconveniences, and that patience and understanding would smooth over any differences. Despite trying to maintain normalcy, Ananya's stress began to seep into her own routines. Sleep became restless, and even simple tasks at work felt overwhelming. Friends she had started making in the city noticed her exhaustion and offered support, though she couldn't articulate the true source of her distress. The uncertainty of not knowing whether these incidents were accidents or intentional manipulations became a heavy weight. Ananya started to feel trapped, unsure whether she could trust the household she had once considered her sanctuary. Gradually, the small incidents accumulated into a disturbing pattern that could no longer be ignored. Ananya realized that someone was deliberately interfering with her life, and the thought of being sabotaged from within her own home sent a shiver through her. Each missing document, each altered email, and each spoiled meal was no longer an isolated inconvenience. They were pieces of a puzzle she could not yet solve, a puzzle that threatened to undermine everything she had worked so hard to build in her new life. The quiet tension that had started subtly now pulsed with a hidden menace, foreshadowing that the challenges she faced were far from ordinary and far from accidental. The tension in the apartment escalated quietly, but relentlessly, and it wasn't long before it seeped into the most personal areas of Ananya and Raghav's life. One afternoon, Raghav received a notification from his bank that caused his heart to skip a beat. Several large transfers had been made from Ananya's account, all to unknown recipients. Confused and alarmed, he immediately checked the statements and found more discrepancies, loans he had never authorized, online purchases he had no knowledge of, and payments that drained significant sums from their joint accounts. When he brought this to Ananya's attention, she was equally stunned. She had never initiated these transactions, and the sight of her name attached to fraudulent activity filled her with a cold dread she had never experienced before. Raghav's disbelief slowly shifted to suspicion, though he struggled to pinpoint who could be behind such elaborate deception. Ananya, feeling helpless, began to question herself, fearing that perhaps she had unknowingly become involved in some kind of scam. Yet, deep down, she knew her instincts. She had never handled money carelessly, and she would have remembered authorizing such transfers. The unease that had begun with minor incidents in the house now erupted into a crisis that threatened both her financial stability and her relationship with her husband. As they sifted through the bank records and transaction histories, another disturbing pattern emerged. Each suspicious transfer seemed to follow a routine. It occurred late at night, often when Ananya was asleep or distracted with household tasks. It became increasingly difficult for the couple to determine whether the culprit had inside knowledge of their daily lives, or was simply extremely fortunate with timing. Anxiety took root in Raghav, as he realized that this was not a random hacking incident. Someone close, someone who knew their routines intimately, had access to Ananya's personal information. The suspicion quietly turned toward Meera, though Raghav initially struggled to reconcile the idea with his perception of his mother. Meera had always seemed composed, intelligent, and protective of the family. She had even presented herself as an ally to Ananya, offering guidance in household management and gently advising her about life in a new country. Yet the more they examined the timing and the patterns of the transactions, the more it became clear that only someone with consistent, daily access to Ananya's life could have orchestrated such precision. Ananya began noticing subtle behaviors that had previously seemed innocuous. Meera often lingered in the study when Ananya was working, commenting on the computer setup or offering to help organize files. Small glances at Ananya's phone were dismissed at the time as curiosity, but in retrospect, every action now seemed calculated. Even the friendly advice Meera gave about managing finances or work stress took on a new, unsettling dimension. It appeared that she had been laying the groundwork for weeks, cultivating trust and then using it to manipulate circumstances in her favor. As the evidence mounted, the couple realized the severity of the situation. This was no longer a simple misunderstanding or minor household tension. Someone had carefully orchestrated a financial trap that could ruin Ananya's reputation, drain her accounts, and shatter their marriage. The stakes were higher than they had ever imagined, and the threat came not from an outsider but from within the walls of their own home. Fear and suspicion replaced the sense of security they had once taken for granted, leaving them desperate to uncover the truth and stop the unfolding betrayal before it was too late. The tension in the neighborhood began to ripple outward, in ways Ananya could not control. It started subtly, with whispered comments from neighbors and passing remarks that seemed casual but carried an undercurrent of judgment. One afternoon, she noticed a neighbor standing by the mailbox, pretending to check her letters but clearly observing her comings and goings. A week later, an anonymous note was slipped under her door, mentioning a car she supposedly drove to a pawn shop late at night. The note contained no name, no signature, just enough detail to plant doubt in her mind. Ananya was certain she had never left the apartment at such hours, but the suggestion alone made her heart race and her mind question her memory. The feeling of being watched, judged, and misrepresented gnawed at her daily life. It wasn't long before digital evidence began to appear as well. Ananya discovered emails and screenshots sent anonymously, linking her email address to gambling websites she had never visited. Every attempt to report or block these connections seemed to fail. Her inbox overflowed with messages that cast her in a negative light, as if someone was carefully building a case to ruin her reputation. At the office, colleagues started noticing unusual emails forwarded to them under her name, with subtle hints of impropriety. Ananya began feeling the isolation she had feared when moving to a new country. No one around her could fully understand the magnitude of the betrayal she was experiencing. The psychological impact was profound. Simple tasks, like going to the grocery store or picking up a package, began to feel like an ordeal. Every glance from a neighbor, every passing comment, seemed loaded with hidden meaning. Ananya felt trapped in a web of suspicion and falsehood, with her home, the one place that should have felt safe, becoming the center of the storm. The quiet tension she had first noticed weeks ago now seemed to infect every corner of her life. Even Raghav, despite his best efforts to support her, struggled to process the layers of deception and rumor. Meera's role in all this was invisible to outsiders, yet the timing of these events always seemed convenient. She presented herself as sympathetic to Ananya, often suggesting that the rumors and accusations were minor misunderstandings that could be ignored. Her calm demeanor made Ananya doubt her own instincts, creating a conflict between the reality she sensed and the advice she was being given. The subtle manipulation went deeper than mere observation. It shaped the perceptions of everyone around Ananya, turning the neighborhood into an environment of suspicion and isolation. As the rumors grew, Ananya's own confidence began to erode. She questioned whether she could continue working, whether she could maintain relationships, and whether the life she had worked so hard to build in Dallas was unraveling. Even small social interactions became laden with tension. Casual greetings were met with cold stares, and invitations to community events disappeared. The sense of community that should have supported her instead felt like a cage, and every step she took seemed watched, recorded, and twisted into evidence against her. The situation escalated further when an anonymous package arrived at the apartment, containing printed screenshots of her online activity, labeled "Make her appear reckless and irresponsible." The message was clear: someone was crafting a narrative, and she was at the center of it. Fear and paranoia began to define her daily existence, leaving Ananya in a constant state of vigilance. The neighborhood rumors were no longer mere whispers, they were strategic attacks, designed to isolate, confuse, and destabilize her. The lines between reality and manipulation blurred, and Ananya realized that the person behind this carefully orchestrated campaign had access to her most private moments. The question remained: who could harbor such knowledge, and what was their ultimate goal? Raghav's growing unease finally reached a breaking point. He could no longer ignore the mounting evidence of sabotage, the inexplicable transactions, the ruined reputation, and the relentless pressure Ananya faced in their home and neighborhood. Determined to uncover the truth, he decided to install a hidden camera in the study, a room Ananya often used for work and personal correspondence. He hoped to catch any unauthorized activity, perhaps a simple mishap or an outside intrusion. But what the footage captured was far beyond what he could have imagined. The first night revealed only shadows and faint movements, but as the days passed, the camera recorded actions that shattered every assumption they had held about the source of their troubles. Late at night, the footage showed Meera entering the study quietly, her movements deliberate and careful. She wore gloves, as though anticipating fingerprints could betray her. Sitting at the desk, she opened Ananya's laptop, navigating through emails and financial records with precision. Every click, every keystroke, appeared methodical, controlled, and intentional. She copied sensitive files, created fraudulent accounts, and even forged digital signatures that perfectly mimicked Ananya's own. Raghav could hardly breathe as he watched the evidence, the reality of the betrayal crystallizing in front of him. The woman he had trusted as his mother, the person who had been living under the same roof, was actively manipulating their lives and framing his wife. It was not just the financial deceit that was revealed. Meera had also orchestrated incidents to destabilize Ananya psychologically. The footage showed her tampering with letters and documents, carefully rearranging items in the apartment, and even planting evidence in places Ananya frequently used. She manipulated emails and text messages, sending them to colleagues and neighbors in ways that made Ananya appear unreliable, reckless, and untrustworthy. Every detail was meticulously planned, highlighting the months of observation and control Meera had exercised. The realization that these events had not been random accidents but carefully designed attacks left Raghav and Ananya in shock, struggling to comprehend the depth of the deception. Raghav reviewed the recordings repeatedly, trying to process the meticulousness of Meera's actions. Each night, she appeared in different areas of the apartment, moving with quiet confidence as she executed her plans. Her awareness of Ananya's routines, her ability to anticipate schedules, and the subtle way she avoided leaving evidence pointed to a disturbing premeditation. It became clear that every moment of tension, every ruined document, and every rumor in the neighborhood had been carefully orchestrated. The hidden camera revealed a betrayal that went far beyond ordinary family conflict, exposing an elaborate scheme built on manipulation, fear, and greed. Ananya, watching the footage alongside Raghav, felt a complex mix of relief, anger, and disbelief. Relief, because the truth was finally visible and undeniable. Anger, because someone she had welcomed into her home had weaponized intimacy and trust. Disbelief, because the scale and audacity of the plan were almost unimaginable. Their relationship, once strained by suspicion, now became a united front against the hidden enemy they had uncovered. The realization that Meera's calculated behavior had been driving the household chaos for months forced them to reconsider every moment of interaction, every helpful suggestion, and every seemingly innocent act that had now revealed a far darker intention. The footage became their most powerful evidence. It confirmed that the nightmare they were living was no accident, no misunderstanding, but a deliberate attack from within the home. Raghav and Ananya now faced the critical decision of how to confront this betrayal, protect their finances, and reclaim the life Meera had sought to destroy. The hidden camera had uncovered the truth, but it also revealed just how far-reaching and dangerous the mother-in-law's manipulation had become. The next steps would determine whether justice and peace could be restored, or whether the damage had already been done. As Raghav and Ananya absorbed the shocking footage from the hidden camera, a deeper, more disturbing question began to take shape. Why? Why would Meera, someone who had been entrusted with care and guidance in their home, go to such extreme lengths to sabotage their lives? The more they reflected on her actions, the clearer the motive became, though it was darker and more personal than they could have imagined. Meera's manipulations were not merely about control, they were rooted in fear, envy, and a desire for dominance over her son's life. She feared losing the attention and affection of Raghav, who had grown increasingly independent since marrying Ananya. In her mind, if Ananya could be discredited and driven away, Meera would remain the central figure in her son's life, unchallenged and revered. But the motive extended beyond emotional control. Raghav's career had begun to flourish, and with it came financial independence and business ventures that Meera had long coveted. She saw in Ananya a subtle but persistent influence, someone who encouraged her husband to make decisions and take risks that did not align with Meera's vision of family hierarchy. The careful sabotage of Ananya's reputation, finances, and mental stability was a strategy to reassert dominance, to create a wedge between husband and wife, and ultimately, to regain the authority she believed she had lost. Every action Meera had taken, from the missing documents to the neighborhood rumors, was meticulously calculated to isolate Ananya and weaken her position in the family. Digging further, Raghav and Ananya discovered evidence of planning that went back months before Meera moved in. Digital searches on identity theft, tutorials on manipulating online accounts, and patterns of surveillance suggested a premeditated scheme. Meera had studied the technology and strategies she needed to execute her plan, ensuring that every incident appeared plausible as an accident or misfortune. The level of detail and patience required was staggering. This was not a fleeting act of anger or jealousy, but a prolonged, carefully orchestrated assault on her daughter-in-law's life. The psychological implications of Meera's scheme were equally alarming. She had not only attacked Ananya's finances, but also her sense of reality and stability. By manipulating emails, letters, and social interactions, Meera created doubt around Ananya's own actions, making her question her memory, judgment, and self-worth. This level of psychological warfare was deliberate and cruel, designed to erode confidence and foster dependence. Meera positioned herself as a concerned elder, a role that allowed her to observe, interfere, and control while maintaining an appearance of kindness and propriety. Ananya and Raghav began piecing together the larger picture. Meera's fear of losing relevance, her desire for control over finances, and her calculated manipulation of perception all converged into a single, relentless strategy. Every minor incident in the apartment, every rumor in the neighborhood, every financial discrepancy now made sense within this context. They understood that they were dealing with someone whose cunning and patience had been underestimated, a person who had weaponized trust and intimacy to achieve her goals. The revelation was both horrifying and clarifying, providing the roadmap they needed to take the next step, exposing the truth and reclaiming their lives from the shadow of Meera's deception. This understanding shifted the fear into purpose. No longer were the disturbances random or ambiguous. They were part of a comprehensive plan that could now be confronted and dismantled. Knowing the motive allowed Ananya and Raghav to anticipate Meera's next moves, protect themselves from further manipulation, and prepare for the involvement of authorities. The hidden motives illuminated the scale of betrayal, but they also gave the couple clarity and direction, setting the stage for justice and eventually healing. Once the evidence of Meera's deliberate manipulations became undeniable, Raghav and Ananya realized that the next step had to involve the authorities. They contacted the local police and presented the surveillance footage, bank statements, and digital records that clearly showed Meera's involvement in financial fraud, cyber manipulation, and harassment. Initially, the investigators were cautious, given the unusual nature of the case. Elder family members were rarely accused of such calculated deception, and many officers were skeptical that a mother-in-law could orchestrate a sophisticated scheme against her own daughter-in-law. But as the evidence was reviewed, the reality of the situation became undeniable. The police quickly began building a formal case. Digital forensic experts analyzed the laptops, emails, and financial accounts. They found traces of Meera's activities, unauthorized logins, email forwards to third parties, and the creation of fake accounts under Ananya's name. The records confirmed the careful planning and premeditation that had been visible in the hidden camera footage. Each piece of evidence was like a puzzle, slowly revealing the full scope of Meera's manipulations. It was clear that she had not acted impulsively. Every move had been calculated, precise, and intended to isolate Ananya, destroy her credibility, and destabilize the family dynamic. Confronted with the digital and physical evidence, Meera initially attempted to deny any wrongdoing. She claimed ignorance, suggesting that the bank errors and neighborhood rumors were unfortunate coincidences or the result of cybercrime by strangers. Her composure, however, began to falter as investigators questioned her extensively. Each denial was met with concrete proof, timestamps on emails, surveillance recordings, and forensic traces of her computer activity. The facade of innocence slowly crumbled, revealing the extent of her premeditated actions and her willingness to betray the family she claimed to love. As the case developed, the broader community reacted with shock and disbelief. Friends, neighbors, and colleagues struggled to reconcile the image of the calm, respected elder with the reality of a calculated manipulator. Media attention began to grow as news of the case spread, with the story framed as a cautionary tale about betrayal within families and the subtle dangers of domestic manipulation. Ananya and Raghav, while emotionally strained, were relieved that the truth was finally being recognized. The case also sparked discussions about elder abuse in reverse, how respect and authority could be weaponized to harm others in the household. During the investigation, it became evident that Meera had underestimated one crucial factor: the resilience and intelligence of her targets. Ananya, initially overwhelmed and doubting herself, had documented her experiences and gathered her own evidence once the pattern became clear. Raghav, while initially hesitant to suspect his mother, had acted decisively to capture concrete proof. Their combined efforts ensured that Meera's manipulations could not continue unchecked. Investigators praised their careful documentation and persistence, noting that such cases often went unresolved because victims lacked proof or were intimidated by the familial relationship. The legal proceedings moved forward, with Meera facing charges for fraud, cybercrime, and harassment. Her attempts to downplay her actions were systematically dismantled by the meticulous evidence gathered by authorities. The case became emblematic of a disturbing truth: betrayal could emerge from within a household, hidden behind the veneer of familial love and respect. For Ananya and Raghav, the involvement of the police was not only a legal necessity, but also an emotional turning point, marking the moment when the unseen threat inside their home was finally confronted, and justice began its slow, deliberate course. The courtroom was tense, filled with reporters, neighbors, and curious onlookers, all eager to witness the unraveling of a family scandal that had captivated the city. Meera's demeanor remained composed at first, as if confidence and authority could shield her from the weight of her actions. But as the evidence was presented, her calm facade began to crack. The surveillance footage, Bank statements, forensic reports, and the documentation meticulously gathered by Ananya and Raghav painted a vivid picture of betrayal, manipulation, and calculated deceit. Every lie she had told, every subtle sabotage she had orchestrated, was laid bare before the court. For those present, it was difficult to believe that such meticulous planning had come from the hands of a mother-in-law, someone traditionally seen as a caretaker and guide within the family. Ananya and Raghav sat together, their hands clasped tightly, feeling a mixture of relief and lingering fear. The months of manipulation had taken a toll on their emotional and mental well-being. Yet, seeing the undeniable truth presented in such a structured and undeniable manner brought a sense of validation. The humiliation, the sleepless nights, the paranoia, and the constant questioning of reality, everything was now accounted for, and the person responsible could no longer hide behind false innocence. Each testimony and piece of evidence was a step toward reclaiming the life that Meera had sought to dismantle. As the trial progressed, details of Meera's motives emerged, shocking even those familiar with her presence in the household. Investigators described her fear of losing her son's attention and her desire to maintain control over his life and business. The psychological warfare she had waged, manipulating Ananya's environment, tampering with communications, and planting false evidence was revealed in painstaking detail. The court heard how Meera had leveraged trust and familial authority to gain access to personal information, how she had orchestrated the neighborhood rumors, and how she had weaponized the digital world to attack Ananya's reputation. Each revelation highlighted the depth of her planning and the cruelty behind her actions. The public reaction outside the courtroom was intense. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers expressed disbelief that someone could betray their family with such precision. Conversations in local cafes, social media threads, and community meetings centered on the unusual nature of the case. A mother-in-law using deception and modern technology to dismantle her daughter-in-law's life. For Ananya and Raghav, the attention was bittersweet. It brought validation and support, but it also reminded them of the emotional scars left by the months of tension and fear. Still, they knew that the story needed to be told, both as a warning and as a testament to their resilience. When the verdict was finally delivered, Meera was found guilty on multiple counts, including fraud, cyber manipulation, harassment. The sentencing, though just, could not undo the months of emotional turmoil, yet it represented a definitive turning point. Ananya and Raghav emerged from the courtroom determined to rebuild their lives, focusing on healing, trust, and mutual support. They moved slowly, re-establishing routines, reconnecting with friends, and reclaiming the sense of security that had been shattered. The experience had left scars, but it also forged a deeper bond between them, strengthened by the shared struggle against deception within their own home. The scandal became a nationwide story, a cautionary tale about the hidden dangers that can exist even within families. It reminded people that betrayal does not always come from strangers, and that vigilance, documentation, and courage are sometimes necessary to protect oneself. For Ananya and Raghav, the ordeal was a painful chapter in their lives, but one that ultimately led to clarity, justice, and the possibility of a new beginning. In a world where trust had been weaponized, they emerged not broken, but resilient, proving that even the deepest betrayals can be confronted, and life can be rebuilt stronger than before.